Hi, how you doing? Justin here, and in this video today I'm going to give you my top 5 tips for new guitar players. Now, if you're just starting out on guitar, there's going to be a whole heap of information for you over on the beginner's course on my website, but these tips kind of preempt that a little bit and give you a bit of food for thought, make sure that you don't get off to a rocky start. So the first thing, and I think the most important thing if you're going to learn to play guitar, is to keep it fun. Now, if you're doing the course on my site, you're going to find that there's a practice schedule, and I recommend you doing stuff like practicing putting the chord on and off and changing between the chords and practicing strumming patterns and tapping your foot and stuff like that. And all of that stuff will accelerate how quickly you learn guitar. But it's really important that you keep it fun too. And a really good example of that is going to be playing songs. Now, it's likely that I'm going to suggest, like, hey, you've learned A and D, why don't you have a go at playing Dance the Night Away, for example, on my course. And you might be like, but man, I don't want to do that. I want to play like Red Hot Chili Peppers or Metallica or you know, Dolly Parton's, whatever. It's going to be different depending on what you like. And there's no harm in having a go at songs that are far too hard for you. But what you have to do is be realistic about it and go, hey, I've only been playing guitar for 1 week, maybe this really hard John Frusciante solo, I shouldn't expect to be able to play that already. There's no harm. You're not going to get hurt if you just have a bit of a go at it. You probably realize that it's a bit difficult and you need to build up to it, but there's no harm in having a little go at it. So whatever it is that you're doing on guitar, make sure that you keep it fun, okay? If it becomes a bit of a drag, try and find something else to do, because if you don't find it fun, you're very unlikely to stick at it. Okay, particularly in those early stages. Now, I'm hoping that I can keep my course nice and fun for you all of the way through, and that the progress that you make by doing some of the exercises kind of leads you to more fun. So that's kind of, you know, a little bit you might be like, yeah, maybe doing these chord changes isn't the most fun, but it means that I'll be able to play that awesome song very soon. So, you know, trying to keep your eye on the prize a little bit will help make some of those exercises fun as well. Hopefully you find it a little bit challenging as well, like keeping a tab on how many chord changes you can do in a minute is a really good kind of self-motivation trick. But, you know, really the key thing there is keeping it fun. Now, that kind of leads nicely on to my second point, which is about the practice schedule. Now, I do recommend trying to keep a practice schedule and timing your practice. It'll make your practice time much more efficient. But I want you to remember there's a difference between practicing and playing. So playing should be the fun stuff. And I recommend that you split it 50-50. So you spend half of your time doing practice with the timer, doing exercises, you know, a very specific thing, and try not to let yourself get distracted. If you're doing 5 minutes practice on strumming, you do 5 minutes practice on strumming with the timer, and you don't halfway through it start doing something else. If you can stick in the practice time to doing really focused practice, it'll make the best results for you and get you there the fastest. But the other half of your practice time should be whatever you like. Playing songs, it might be occasionally some of the stuff that was practice. So there's just because it was in the practice time, like 1 minute changes, for example. A lot of people, this is, you know, how many chord changes you can do in a minute. A lot of people really enjoy that. So if you want to do extra 1 minute changes in your fun time, that's cool, so long as it's really, really fun. Okay, so really divide that time up. I would recommend that you do the practice stuff first if you can, okay, because you might find that the fun time gets a bit extended. So if you're doing, I don't know, half an hour a day is a great amount of practice time for beginners. If you were doing 15 minutes of kind of proper organized practice and then 15 minutes of fun, then that's awesome. What you don't want to do is do the fun first, do half an hour, and then go, oh, I've got no time for my proper practice. Okay, I mean, you know, like I said, if it's got to be fun. So if you're really finding the practice time a drag, then maybe for a few days you just do the fun stuff and then come back to the practice when you can. But you really will find the particularly in the early stages, it's all about making chord changes. That's the biggest hurdle for most people. That and finger pain, which I'll talk about in a second. So getting, you know, doing some practice where you're doing those chord changes regularly will, you know, mean that you can play songs faster. And I think that's the point for most people. So try and bear that in mind. Now, I already mentioned it just there, finger pain. And my tip 3 is to avoid finger pain. Now, when you're first learning the guitar, the skin on your fingers is going to be quite soft, and you're pressing them down on usually metal guitar strings. Okay, so there's a couple of things that you want to do to avoid making your fingers too painful in the early stages. The first one is getting the right guitar. Now, I've got a whole lesson on that. I personally think that you should start off an electric guitar because it's easier to press the strings down. On a steel string acoustic guitar, you have to, the strings are usually further off the fretboard, so you have to press them down harder, so you get a lot more finger pain. You won't be able to practice as much. So electric guitars generally, especially if you get a decent one, the strings are a bit closer to the fretboard, so they're easier to press down, which makes the whole experience a little nicer. Nylon string guitars, classical guitars, are a little nicer under the finger, but the fretboards are a lot wider and they don't tend to make the sounds that most people want to hear. So, electric guitar I think is where it's at, but again, that's, I guess that's your call. Watch the video I've got later in the course about that. But there's a couple of other things as well, not to do with the guitar or the type of guitar. And that is, you can do a lot of stuff on guitar, exercises where you don't have to hold the fingers down hard all the time. If you're looking at, practicing your chord shapes, maybe you don't press them down real hard all the time. You can just hold them in place softly. Yeah, if you're strumming the chord to test whether the notes sound good, of course you're going to have to press the chord, press the fingers down fairly hard probably at the beginning to get your chord sounding nice. But things like strumming, in the course I recommend that you hold one chord down and practice your strumming. But if your fingers are getting sore, just wrap your fingers around the strings so you're not getting any sound, and then practice your strumming that way. You don't have to be holding the chord down. And that's a really nice way you can use strumming practice to kind of divide up the other stuff where you have to press down harder. And that's a nice way of making sure that you're keeping your fingers not too painful. Because, they're going to hurt a little bit, right? Don't get me wrong. If you're learning guitar, you're going to have a little period where the tips of your fingers get a bit sore while the skin toughens up. It's just part of the deal. But like I said, here's some tips. So getting the right guitar is really important. Not pressing down when you have to. Trying to do some stuff like strumming practice is a really, really good way. As well, having breaks regularly. If it's music time and you want to do something musical, you might want to explore some other parts of the site that you might find interesting, stuff of information about guitar players, music theory, ear training, stuff like that can be done, which is, you don't need the guitar in your hand, you can give your fingers a break. And also, last little tip for you on that is to think about spreading your practice time during the day if you can, right? Rather than doing it all in one block, maybe doing 5 minutes in the morning, 5 minutes lunchtime, 5 minutes in the evening. If, of course, people who are working that kind of scheduling might not work for you, or even just spreading it out, a little 5 minutes and then have an hour off while you do some other stuff around the house, then another 5 minutes, then another break, then another 5 minutes, that kind of thing. Whatever it takes to really avoid the fingers becoming really painful, because if it gets really sore, it's going to put you off playing again. And in those early stages, it's all about sticking with it, because if you can stick with it for like a month or two, then you'll find that the journey becomes a lot easier. Your fingers will be feeling a bit tougher. You'll be able to practice longer. Your rhythm will be more together. You'll have the chord changes a bit smoother, so you'll be able to play more songs, so you feel more inspired. So it's really those first few months that you really want to try and tide your way through. And if you can do that, you'll probably find that the journey becomes easier and easier as you go along. Big tip number 4 for new guitar players is to remember it's much more about practice than it is about talent. I'm not really even sure that, talent as we think of it, like people who just sit down and play guitar, really exists. At least I've never seen it. In all of the years I've been teaching, I've never had a student come in and just suddenly be able to play without doing loads of practice. I meet people occasionally, professionals, who say they never practice, but those guys play all the time. And the way they play is naturally a practice thing. So I think that's potentially what you could describe as talent, is the people who can play in a way that is naturally practicing for them. Okay, but it is about putting the hours in, right? That's the thing. If you practice like 3 minutes or 5 minutes a day, you're not going to get as good as fast as somebody who practices 30 minutes, 60 minutes a day, right? That's how it goes. So you have to be a bit careful in the very early stages because your fingers are going to be sore. So if you try and overdo the practice, you might end up with too much finger pain and then it just won't work for you. I think 30 minutes a day is a great amount for a beginner guitar player. When you're first starting out, you don't probably want to do more than that. If you're like really super keen, you could maybe do 2 30-minute slots with a couple of hours apart, but you don't want to risk overdoing it. I think that's important, especially first few weeks, maybe the first month. You're better off, I think, just keeping it chilled, you know, and if you really want to get more involved, maybe looking at ear training or music theory, that kind of thing, you just don't want to go too hard at it and risk hurting your fingers and then feeling disappointed with that and not being able to play. Because if you really hurt the ends of your fingers and wear the skin off, it can take a couple of weeks before you can play again. So just beware of that. You know, you often hear, like in the song Summer of '69, about people playing till their fingers bled. And I actually did that when I was in college. I've been playing a long time, but I was doing 8-hour days plus. So, you know, you don't want to be doing that at the beginner stages. It'll be a bit easier than you think to wear the skin out. Probably won't get to a bleeding point, but it'll get really, really sore. And it's just something that you want to avoid, while remembering that the more practice you do, the better you're going to get. So try and aim for a little often. Try and get practice done every day rather than doing, like, you know, 4 hours on a Sunday afternoon. Okay, if you do a big stint like that, your fingers are going to get really sore. Okay, just try and avoid that. Try and do a little often is the key thing for beginner guitar players as regarding practice. Okay, big tip number 5 is to play more than think. Now, this comes with some caveats because, of course, I've talked a lot about not playing so much as to make your fingers hurt. And I've suggested potentially using things like music theory or ear training and stuff like that to give your fingers a rest. And that is perfectly valid, and it still stands. What I think the danger is with thinking too much is spending time that you could be doing playing thinking about stuff. So like music theory and stuff is really valuable. It's really useful. But again, in the early stages, getting the fingers on the strings is what's going to count. Okay, so trying to get your practice time in, your time on the instrument is really important. If you've got like a half-hour slot for music time or guitar time and you spend it doing music theory and ear training, or research, even worse, researching guitars, reviews and stuff like that, or effects pedals or amplifiers, whatever, if you spend that valuable time doing that and then you don't get to the guitar playing time, that's really bad. So really make sure that you get your playing done first before you do any thinking. Use the thinking time as rest for your fingers so that your fingers aren't going to hurt, or in times where you can't actually play the guitar. Right? That's a really key thing. You know, it kind of ties in with everything else again. You know, it's really important that you put as much time as you can putting the flesh on the metal. If you're assuming that you're playing a steel string or electric guitar. Of course, if you're playing a nylon string, it'll be getting the flesh on the nylon. But that is the key thing here at this stage, okay? Getting the fingers on. So try and avoid getting lost in little rabbit holes on YouTube, like watching guitar video reviews about this guitar and why that one's better and whether you should use this modeling amp or that modeling amp or this valve amp, or, you know, or whether what the right fingering is on this chord, or what, you know. Just get stuck in and put your fingers on the strings, and that is the keyest, most importantest thing that you can do on your guitar journey. Other than watching this video, of course, which has probably just eaten up like 10 minutes of your practice time. Hopefully, you've not either not started your guitar journey yet, or you've used this as a little break to give your fingers a rest, and you're, you know, having a wander around the site. So, look, I hope these tips will help you stick with the guitar. Like I said, really bear in mind that these first few months of your playing are the toughest times, okay? The finger pain, the frustration of not being able to make the chord changes, not feeling confident with your rhythm, all of those things, they feel strongest in the first couple of months of playing for everybody. Me included, every student I've ever encountered has that feeling. So when you're feeling a bit frustrated, try and stick with it for those first few months, and you're going to start, oh, yeah, my chords are happening. Oh, wow, I'm playing those. Wow, I've learned those chords. Now I can play this song that I really wanted to play. And then once you get to that point, it becomes a bit more kind of, you know, the motivation comes from the enjoyment of progress. And those first few months, you should be making progress, and you should be seeing that your chord changes are getting faster, which is one of the reasons why I recommend that you kind of track how many chord changes you're doing. You should start to feel the rhythms a little bit, you know, feeling more relaxed and a bit kind of cooler. You should notice those things, but it still can be quite frustrating in those early stages. So try and stick with it. Hopefully you'll really enjoy all of the course and all of the lessons I've got coming up, and I'll see you for plenty more very soon. You take care of yourselves. Good luck on the journey. Bye-bye.